Hi, I am Jillian Lama. I am a certified master at life and weight loss coach and host of the Body You Crave podcast. And so a lot of the work that I do with mostly women is around the areas of weight loss, emotional eating, how do we lose the weight and actually keep it off for life, as well as how do we create consistent habits while breaking the habits that we don't want anymore, like emotional eating or emotional drinking. And I've noticed over the last year or two with myself and with the people that I work with is that each of them have somebody in their life who's close to them, whether it's a parent, a spouse, maybe an adult child who is emotionally abusive. And so there's this connection between emotional abuse and emotional eating and why this comes out as a coping mechanism and codependency. So we are going to dive into that today. And I've titled this Hungry for Love because ultimately that's what we are really hungry for. I think we're hungry because a lot of times we starve ourselves in diets thinking this is the way we have to lose weight. But then we're also hungry for our core desires, these core needs that didn't get met as children. And so I'm going to walk you through what this looks like, how these three pieces go together, how I define them and recognize them, and also now break down the emotional eating or emotional drinking cycle so that you can start to see it in your own life and find the patterns and break free. Because so often we get stuck doing the same thing over and over and over again. And this is a problem as old as dirt, right? Paul talks about it in Romans, that why is it that I do what I don't want to do and I don't do the things that I want to do, right? Like it's something we all know, we all go through. And I guarantee we've been struggling with this for the last 2000 plus years. And the 2000 years before that, they were struggling with this same thing, this same concept. And it's not just about sin, as the church might tell us. It's about, or like even just human nature, it's about how our brains are wired. And it's about this desire that we have to feel good in the moment. So let's start from the very beginning at what really underpins this emotional eating and emotional abuse habit that we get stuck in, and that is codependency. Now, the way that I am going to describe codependency today is it is a core wound of I don't feel good enough. It's a core belief of I am not enough. And it can have many different flavors. So it's kind of like ice cream, right? You can have all different flavors of ice cream. So there's I'm not thin enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not busy enough, I haven't done enough or achieved enough, I'm not smart enough. There's some level of I am not enough. And you may not have been told this growing up. It's just what your young mind made it mean. It was just trying to make sense of the world. And so it was like trying to say, this means that. And so even if it wasn't directly related to your body or your weight or anything like that, you might have learned that how you looked wasn't bad, but looking like that over there was better. And this is where I fell into, was feeling like I wasn't enough. And there were many factors that played a role in that. One, my biological dad wasn't in the picture. So I grew up with my mom and my stepdad, and then I had two other sisters. They're technically half sisters, but I grew up with them. I know nothing else. So to me, they are sisters, but I had a different last name. And so there was a part of me that knew, like, somehow I am different. There's a part of me that is different. And I wasn't adopted by my stepdad until I was 12. So I was the oddball out. I also didn't feel like I could ask about my biological dad. He wasn't around. We never talked about him, and they thought that was going to be easier on me. But I just made that mean he wants nothing to do with me. I must be a burden. Somehow I'm not good enough because he doesn't want me. I am unlovable somehow. So there's this whole pattern that gets kind of introduced in childhood and then reinforced growing up. And then similarly around my body, I wasn't ever told like, oh, I was chubby, but my cousin got praised for being tall and thin and I didn't. So it was kind of noticing like, oh, I'm not getting praised for being tall and thin. That's not good. I don't want that. And so it's kind of having this internal belief of, oh, I must be fat. So it's just my brain as a young child trying to make sense of the world and say, like, this means that. It's something that we all do. And that's one of the things where we develop these core wounds. And so it was, I'm not thin enough. I'm not pretty enough. I don't fit in, because it wasn't that how I looked was bad. It was because looking like this over here, a way that I don't look, is better. So we just want to be aware of the stories that we grow up with as kids, because this is something that impacts us all throughout our life. So up until about the age of 7, we are downloading everything around us, right? Our brains are just little sponges. By the time we're 3, so much of our programming has already been established, right? And a lot of times parents think, and myself included, of like, oh no, they're not gonna realize this. They're not gonna notice until they're 5, 6, 7. And for other parents, they might even be thinking 10, 11, 12. But at a very early age, our brains are just absorbing and soaking in everything around us. And so we're learning what it means to be loved, accepted, approved of. We learn how to oh, I have to stay busy in order to show that I'm doing enough. I have to stay busy in order to earn a break. I have to weigh a certain amount in order to earn getting to eat certain foods. That might be something that we learn later in life, but it comes from the same process that we are learning as kids. So from that young age, we are now gathering evidence. We're drawing conclusions with our young little brains that are not fully developed yet. And then we go through life looking for evidence to prove these thoughts true. And we're finding more evidence for how we're not enough, how we're not thin enough, we're not pretty enough, we're not smart enough, we need to be doing and achieving more. And so a lot of times with codependency, especially with victims like us, what comes out is people pleasing, perfectionism, high achieving. Those are going to be our protector parts. So we don't like feeling not good enough. That feels terrible. That activates shame within us. And shame is something that feels horrible. We don't like it. We resist it. And so we've learned from a young age to please other people, to make them happy. If I could be perfect, then I can be the easy child. Then I can be good enough. Then these things will happen. If I can, if I'm really high achieving and I strive for these big things or these big goals and I achieve them, now it's like I'm earning my love. I have to prove and earn myself worthy. So it's like I'm trying to earn love. I'm trying to achieve love. I'm trying to prove something about myself. And this is something that I still notice come up even just a couple of years ago, like well into my 30s. I've noticed this desire of well, if I could just prove to him that then things would get better. If I could just prove and find this evidence, then he would change his mind. Then his beliefs would be changed. And that never happened. It did not work. And so this is often where we're coming at weight loss from too. It's where we come and approach a lot of goals. We can approach relationships and changing relationships. We can approach goals and careers or businesses from this place. We can also approach our bodies of if I could just be this certain size, then I will be loved. Then I will be accepted. Then I will prove that I am good enough. The problem is we end up hanging on for dear life, terrified of gaining the weight back because of what we're making that mean about ourselves. Okay, so codependency, that's what I put up here in this first block. It's just not good enough. And that is really the core thing that connects all of these things, is this core common theme of I am not enough. It's this common belief. And it gets reinforced through a variety of other ways, not just it being expressed verbally like that. Okay, so I'm not enough. And then our protector parts are going to be the perfectionism, the people pleasing, and that's just our brain's way of trying to protect us, trying to keep us safe, trying to avoid shame and feel good. Now, the abusers will also be codependent because they also have an aspect of them. They have a core wound that says that they are not good enough. And this is one of the things that I go over in my 3-day workshop, which I'll make sure there's a link below to get that, where I dive more into the emotional abuse side of things because their shame button gets triggered. They have a narcissistic or an ego injury to where they now feel not good enough, and their protector parts come out in very abusive ways. So it comes out as control, manipulation, demeaning, a desire for this power over structure. Right? So that's how that comes out. And then it's this perfect storm of they feel triggered and not good enough. So now they try to control and make us do things or show up in a certain way so that they can feel good enough. And because their anger, their rage, their silent treatment, their whatever it is that they are, whatever kind of control mechanism, whatever kind of abuse mechanism they're using at the moment, that triggers our not good enough because I'm so used to looking to this other person to make me good enough. Now that triggers me. So now I go into people pleasing, fawning. I respond with perfectionism. If I could just be perfect, if I can just make sure that these things are set up, then I can make sure that this doesn't happen. Now nobody has to feel these bad negative emotions. And when we are not comfortable feeling our own emotions, especially something like shame, we have a really hard time allowing other people to feel their emotions too. This doesn't just apply to spouses or ex-spouses. This also applies to our kids. This applies to coworkers and colleagues and a lot of other people. So the better we get at controlling and managing and allowing our own emotions, the easier it gets to allow other people to manage their own emotions without making it personal or anything about you. So we've got this codependency ring right here. Over here, we have the emotional eating, emotional drinking. And I put this over here too. Sometimes it's chronic dieting, but I feel like as women, we can typically relate to one of these 3 areas: chronic dieting and feeling like you're constantly trying to lose weight, emotional eating, or emotional drinking. Like one of the three will apply. And so that's right in here. Then this over here, we have this emotional abuse, emotional neglect, because for those of us in this program, it may be abuse that we've dealt with, but for other women, it's been neglect. They just haven't had somebody who is emotionally there and available for them. So that doesn't necessarily apply to us, but for a lot of people, the neglect part is also an important piece. So as we kind of see how these intersect, we have this part right here, which is I eat because I don't love myself. So ultimately, we keep trying to lose weight from a place of not feeling good enough. I have to fix myself. And so we do it from a place of punishment. We do it from a place of self-loathing, right? It's the scale was too high. Now I don't get to eat carbs. That I ate too much last night. Now no sugar for you. This happened. Therefore, this is the response. And it's often very punitive. Okay. So we have a really, I don't even want to say a love-hate relationships. A lot of times we just really struggle to love ourselves because that has been part of our programming. We have to earn it. We have to achieve love. And when we aren't getting love from a partner, or we haven't received as much love as like really necessary as a child, it becomes really hard to do that and show up that way for yourself. So we eat here because we don't feel loved by ourselves ultimately. And like, that's what we're trying to do. And usually we are trying to feel good about ourselves so long as other people are validating us. It's like when I get the love and I get the approval and I get the praise from someone outside of me, then I can feel good about me. So that goes into I eat because I don't feel loved by others. And so that is this cross section into the emotional abuse part. And I will explain more of what this looks like and how this emotional eating piece comes out and just the different habits and the cycles that we can get into, because we don't eat in a vacuum. I think this is really important. It's not just what's going on in the moment when we're eating. It's what's happened that day, that week, that month. It's all of the thoughts, all of the emotions, everything that's going on inside of you. And so a lot of times we're eating because of maybe it's an email from your lawyer. Maybe it's what your spouse or your ex said to you last week that was really hurtful or really mean. So there's a variety of ways in which this comes in and it drives our eating or our drinking because we are just trying to feel good in the moment. And then this is all connected here because each one is underpinned by this feeling of I'm not good enough. I don't feel good enough. And then here, the connection between these two is I stay in order to feel good enough. So I stay longer than I should because their approval means I am good enough. There is something about this other person staying with you, picking you, choosing you. And there's something with the internal emotional high that we get when somebody is nice to us and giving us praise and being nice and being sweet or even simply apologizing that we get sucked back in because it's like, this is what we want. And so often we end up chasing the high in these relationships. We chase the high of what it was like in the very beginning, whether it was the first couple of months or maybe the first year. We keep thinking that we can get back there. We had it once. If only we could just get back to where it was before. And I know I thought this a lot. Yeah, for me and my ex, we dated for 6 months. We were overseas. And then we came back stateside. We got engaged. We spent a year being engaged, but living in totally separate countries. And then he came back, we got married. And that first year of marriage was miserable. We didn't even live together more than like 6 months. And it was a living hell. It was terrible. And I had this, even after just a few months of like not even living together, there was this story of he ruins every single holiday. It could be President's Day and he would find a way to ruin it. And I was just like, what the hell? And there was also this thought of like, what just happened here? Like we were fine. Now there were red flags. I just didn't see them at the time. There weren't many though, because of the distance too. So there were some like red flags that I didn't quite see. And the rage and the explosiveness didn't come out until after we were already married. So I felt very deceived. And I also felt like, well, if we could just get back to where we were when we were dating, if we could just get back to where we were when we were engaged, things would be fine. And I kind of thought, well, maybe it's just this institution of marriage. Like what? Like I couldn't figure out what happened. We ended up married for 10 years though. And there was while the abuse and these big outbursts, these big rageful moments became fewer, still every year there were multiple incidents. There were like big explosions, typically once a year. And then there were smaller things that happened on a monthly. And then what I started to realize was actually on a weekly basis, sometimes daily, seeing how these little things would come in, because sometimes it was overt and sometimes it was covert. Right. But I stayed longer than I should have because part of me felt validated, felt loved, felt like this person's approval of me made me good enough. I was better because he chose me, because I was with him. So that's what we want to start to understand and start to see and unpack in our life as a whole, because we can work on the relationships. We can leave the marriage. We can change jobs. We can stop talking with our narcissistic parent. We can like essentially get out of these relationships, but often there's still some contact, and we still have to work on this core wound of not feeling good enough. Because just changing your circumstances, like we learn, does not change how we think and feel. And that is truly what operates how we live. And so Carl Jung has one of my favorite all-time quotes. And he says, until you make the subconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Or if you're Christian, it will direct your life and you will call it God's will. And so many of us wrestled with this thought and this idea of like, but what if this is God's will for me? When really it is just a psychological pattern that's replaying over and over and over again. And that's something that we can break. So we need to bring awareness before we can change anything. And we also want to make sure that we're changing the right thing, right? Because just taking away the food or just leaving the spouse doesn't fix anything internally. We have to really get to the core of really healing our relationship with ourselves and starting to change this narrative of I don't feel good enough, because that will hold you down. So I want everybody here listening, watching, I want you to finish this sentence for yourself. I'm not good enough because. I want you to list all the reasons. Find a journal, a notebook. This can be a note in your phone, but I want you to write out what are all the reasons that you feel like you're not good enough. And you could write about it from, your past self. You can see like in the past, how you felt not good enough and the progress you've made in areas that now you do feel good enough. I also want you to be open and willing and honest with yourself to write it about where you're at right now. About where do you still feel like you're not good enough because of my body, my eating, my ex, because I feel like I'm a bad mom, because I'm tearing apart our family. Whatever the thoughts are that you have, that's what we want to start to uncover. Another great question to look at is, what did you truly want as a child but didn't get from an emotional standpoint from your caregivers, whether those were parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, like whoever it was that took care of you from your primary caregivers. What was it that you truly wanted from them that you didn't get? For a lot of us, it was things like time, attention. It was like doing things and being interested in things that we were interested in. Sometimes it was as simple as like a calm way to bring up problems or not exploding whenever there was an issue. And this is helpful for us to understand from that younger perspective what it is that we deeply desired. Because what inevitably happens is we end up looking to other people to fill that need and to fill that void. And often that's also what keeps us stuck in these abusive relationships. So the beautiful thing here is that if it's a habit that you learned, it's a habit you can unlearn. So codependency here and this belief of I'm not good enough, that is just a habit. It's a habit of thought. It's a habit you learned. It's a habit you can unlearn. Emotional eating and emotional drinking. We're going to talk about this some more. It's a habit that you learned, which means it's a habit you can unlearn. Same thing with emotional abuse and how you showed up in your relationship. It's a habit that you learned. You learned how to show up in a certain way in an attempt to keep you safe, in an attempt to keep the peace, in an attempt to pacify this other person and to avoid any pain or any threat of pain. So that brings us to the two parts of our brain. So I want to kind of talk about this for just a minute. Now, very high level brain science, because I don't even understand a whole lot. We are learning so much about the brain and how it works, but your brain is like a mullet, okay? Business in the front, party in the back. So your thinking brain is your prefrontal cortex. This is right up here behind your forehead. This part of your brain is responsible for language, logic, reasoning, problem solving. It's a part of your brain that sets goals and makes plans and has the best of intentions. It's the one that's like critically thinking and has all of this logic and rationalizing that's happening, right? But it's only responsible for about 5% of our day-to-day actions. That's it, 5%. The rest of it happens in the habit brain. And the habit brain, he wants to party, or she. She wants to party. So you remember that song from like the 90s? I think it was like like a Venga Bus song or something. I don't know. I had to look it up a while ago. But it's just this like obnoxious tune where it's like, we like to party. We like to party. And like, I have to move, I have to dance whenever I sing it. I don't know why. It's just one of those things. Anyways, that is what your brain, your habit brain wants to do. It just wants to party. It wants to have a good time. So it wants to seek pleasure and avoid pain via the path of least resistance. And this is what accounts for 95% of how we operate on a day-to-day basis. So this is important to know, because this is why we feel like we get stuck in the same habits, the same patterns, despite our best intentions, because we revert back to that habit brain, and the brain that is trying to seek pleasure and avoid pain. And that pain can be real or perceived, and the pain will also be mental, physical, or emotional. So the same type of pain that we might experience with feeling like threat from an attacker coming out of the, out of the garage or out of the closet to kill you, that same like fear, that same threat is the same fear that we have in relationships with an abusive and a reactive person. It's the same threatening sense that we can get from, if we don't have dinner ready on time, if the kids are too loud, if things don't go just to plan. And so it increases our fight or flight response. So we're now in a very reactionary space. This is where our cortisol levels are really high. And when cortisol is high, our metabolism slows down. Because again, if we think back from an evolutionary standpoint, if there was a threat, if there was a bear that was going to come out of the woods, we needed to be ready to either fight it or run away. So it wanted to slow down digestion. It wanted to conserve energy. So it does not want to be burning and like burning fat and expending energy, because it's not sure when it's going to get more energy and what it's going to need to do. It's also going to increase ghrelin, your hunger hormone, and decrease leptin, your satiety your satiety hormone. So now we are hungrier, we are less satisfied, our metabolism is slowing down, and our body is specifically diverting energy away from burning fat or digesting food. And we stay in these heightened stress states long term, and then we wonder why we can't seem to lose weight. Why the diets worked for a time and then they stopped, or why they never seemed to be working, or we could hit a certain number and then we just plateaued and we couldn't get off, like we couldn't move it from there. This is why, because there's a strong connection between how we're showing up and the physical aspects going on around us and the emotional aspects going on around us and the physical things happening within our body. That's what we want to be aware of. So again, until we make the subconscious conscious, it will keep directing our life. So I'm going to erase this right now, and we're going to talk for a minute about the emotional abuse cycle, emotional eating cycle. So most of us are pretty comfortable with the abuse cycle. If not, then that's something that we also want to look at. And feel free, I go into more detail in my workshop on that, but Natalie also will work on that, and she does a lot. So if you ever need coaching or anything, feel free to ask in the forum, get some help, but understand that concept and how it works. Because again, we need awareness in order to break the cycle. So what happens here is we have a trigger. That trigger leads to a thought. From that thought, we have an emotion. And from that emotion, I want to make sure that we can still see this, we have an action. Now that action is designed to make us feel better, but it's typically just feel better in the moment. And then until the next trigger comes along. So this trigger, it's typically going to be some kind of circumstance. Someone says something, someone does something, there's traffic, you're running late. You make it mean something, you give it a story. We give it meaning. I'm a terrible boss. I'm a terrible employee. I'm no good. I'm never going to make it. I'm a terrible mom, right? We somehow give it meaning. And then with the emotion, a lot of times there are going to be key emotions that we want to avoid, typically negative ones. And shame is often a key one. It could be guilt. It could be disappointment. Sometimes when we are procrastinating or procrastinacking, we are simply trying to avoid a negative emotion. And it might be rejection. It might be disappointment. It may not always be depression, anxiety, something that feels really big and heavy, but it is a negative emotion. And it's something that we don't want to feel, but it's what I would call kind of like a low level negative emotion. And I noticed for me, one of my big ones is disappointment. I don't want to feel disappointed. So I procrastinate. I don't take action. I don't do things. I will eat. I will snack. I will now procrastinate in an attempt to not do the thing so that I don't have to feel disappointed. And that's often actually what kept me setting really small goals. This is something that I'm still working on, is like actually setting big goals and going after big goals and dreams and dreaming big and being willing to feel disappointed. I know it's hard. It's one of those things where it's like, it seems so simple and so easy. And yet there's a part of me that just is like, I don't want to feel disappointed. No, thank you. Hard pass. Okay. So we have this emotion, and what do? We eat or we drink. Why? Because it'll make us feel better in the moment. Because our brain has learned that food or alcohol creates a rapid, reliable, and effective sense of relief. It makes you feel better, even if it's only momentarily. And what happens is this happens like once or twice, and then it gets reinforced as this pattern until it becomes the consistent habit of your brain learns, oh, at 8 o'clock, it's time to wind down. So let me grab a glass of wine and I'm going to relax and feel better. Or, oh, the kids are in bed. Now I can eat my dessert in peace. Or now I can watch my show and have a snack in peace. Sometimes it happens in like later in the afternoon, like 3, 4 o'clock. And we have that little snack attack. So typically people are going to have a 2 to 4 p.m. kind of like snacking witching hour, or it might be later at night, like 7 to 10 p.m. or 8 to 10 p.m., somewhere in there where it's later. And we just simply learn that food makes me feel better. Sometimes because of a trigger or an event or something that happened that day. Sometimes it's just what's going on in life as a whole. So sometimes it's you feel stressed, overwhelmed, there's a lot to do. Maybe your spouse or your ex has been particularly rude or disrespectful. And so now, because we have not learned and we haven't taken the time and the energy to manage our thoughts and manage our emotions throughout the day, the week, the month, now we let it build up until we can finally relax. And this is why so much of the extra snacking and the emotional eating happens at night, is because it's finally at night when things slow down, when there's less for us to do and distract ourselves with, and when we're left alone with our real thoughts and these real emotions. And we don't like it. It feels very uncomfortable. So there's the physical desire for food. So we want to learn how to say no to extra food that we do not need in the moment, right? There's the in the moment piece. There's also the addressing the underlying piece. Okay, so we can't get to 8 p.m. at night when we typically are going to be eating, a pint of ice cream and feel like, oh, I'm not supposed to eat, and feel like we should just white knuckle and willpower our way through, or feel like that's when we should be doing our mindset work, or that's when we should be running models. And yes, you can 100% run models right then, but you're probably not going to want to. Like, your brain wants what's easy, what's quick, what's efficient, what it knows is going to give you this quick hit of dopamine. And it's not just like sweets or salty foods or fatty foods. It's all food. I think that's why God designed it this way, is to like keep us eating. So as a species, we would survive. All food releases dopamine. This is why we can be emotionally eating even on healthy food. And we can be emotionally eating by eating prior to being hungry, or we are emotionally eating by eating beyond the point of being satisfied. So it's not so much about the food and just taking it away. If all we did was try to take away the food or the drinking without really working on these two things right here, we have no way of getting from this trigger, or what we think is the trigger, to feeling better. Because so often the reason why we have we think that we're eating or drinking is because of the trigger. We think that's what it is. Like, I was late, he said this, my kid had a meltdown. So we think that's the reason, when really there are these thoughts over here, these beliefs, these core patterns. We have these emotions that we aren't dealing with, or that are still just coming up. We might be dealing with them, but they're still just coming up for us. And so we need to learn how to process, learn how to allow them. We need to learn how to manage our thoughts and manage our emotions, starting the first, when we wake up in the morning, and not leaving that until the end of the night. Because we just let our brains run amok. We let our emotions and our nervous system run amok, and we don't learn how to navigate it. We don't learn how to regulate our emotional state. And so we use whatever we can, which sometimes is food or alcohol. And so it's just a coping mechanism. You're likely not addicted. You're likely not an alcoholic. You are likely not addicted to sugar or addicted to sweets or addicted to food. You have simply learned to use food as a coping mechanism, to use alcohol as a coping mechanism, to not feel, to avoid, to distract yourself from emotions that feel really hard or really painful, or even thoughts like, I don't think my husband actually loves me, or this really is abuse. And that really shatters our entire paradigm and how we see the world. It really, like, we go through so much awakening and so much heartache and so much grief. It, like, of course, our body and our brains are going to try to find a way to lessen the pain, even if we're not fully distracting, even just to lessen that, to try to make it feel a little bit better. So we want to have a lot of compassion, and we want to be doing this from a place of curiosity. So we want to get really curious and really compassionate and really lovable with ourselves. No shame, no judgment. Okay, we got to take off that shame shawl, put it to the side, put it down. We're not snuggling up with it anymore. And we need to be really honest with ourselves about what's happening. And that can often bring up that grief. And it can come whether you're married and you're considering getting divorced, or you're considering what are the next steps. It's there whether you're, even if you're already divorced, because a lot of times it's not the person that we're grieving, it's the loss of hope. It's the loss of the life that you thought you were going to have. It's the loss of the dream and the vision that you thought was going to be coming true. It's the loss of what you thought you had right now, or the meaning that you've been giving it. That is grief. And that will come up. And it will come up periodically throughout this awakening process, throughout, if you choose to get divorced, throughout the separation or divorce process. Grief will be there, not because you want the other person back, not because you feel regret, not because you want them back or you want to try to make things work. The grief happens because you are letting go of a dream. You're letting go of the hope of the future you thought you had. And that's hard, because for many of us, we've been married years and years, if not decades. And so it's hard to let go of those dreams. There's also the dream and the hope that maybe he would change, that maybe we would say the right thing and get him to understand, and he would see the error of his ways, and we could, like, finally get along and be this one big happy family. There's a lot of grief in allowing them to be them, allowing him to be a duck and to keep walking and talking and quacking like a duck, right? And so there's grief that comes with that acknowledgement. And we can honor that. But we have to bring awareness to this cycle. So the best place to start is to ask yourself, am I hungry? Have I had enough? That's a great way to start to see where, if any, emotional eating you're doing. With the emotional drinking, this is where I always recommend plan your drinks. So just like we would make an eating plan and a food plan for what do we want to eat for the day, or here are the meals that I want to make this week, we want to plan our drinks. And we want to plan on the nights that I'm not drinking. Why is it that I want to reach for a drink? Why is it that I, even though I might say, okay, only one glass tonight, I have 4. Why is it that I might say, okay, no drinking tonight, I'll drink tomorrow night, and yet I open another bottle? And really, again, with this curiosity of understanding, what are you thinking and what are you feeling? Not just that day, not just in the moment, but about your life as a whole. That is the work. That's what we can truly understand. And it's by assessing and really going through this process and looking back and assessing after we've already eaten, after we already drank, after we already ate it, after we already felt better, so that we can address it better for the next trigger. This is not just about, understand this pattern, understand this cycle, and now all of a sudden it's so easy to say no and nothing is ever an issue. Like, we're working backwards around this. So we're starting to catch it. A lot of us are going to catch it after we feel better, maybe a day or two after. Maybe then we'll start to catch it sooner. So now we'll start to catch it a few hours after. Oh, you know what? I was eating those cookies. I don't think I really needed them. Then we might start to catch it when we are right done eating. We're like, oh, you know what? I feel really good now, but I probably didn't need any of that ice cream. Or, I probably didn't need that last glass of wine. Yeah, I think I probably would have been satisfied with 1. And not 2, so it's like, we got to notice this and work ourselves backwards. Again, letting go of the shame. We can't get anywhere if we keep piling shame and you should know better and you should stop doing this and all the shoulds. We don't get anywhere, because when you do this, you will start to notice it in the moment, pouring that other glass of wine, going for that next serving of pie or whatever the food is, going for that next handful of Cheetos. And then you'll start to notice it before. And this is the beauty. We have got to work our way backwards. It's like potty training. We are potty training our brain, and we are potty training ourselves in the way that habits work. When we assess and we figure this out and we can work backwards through it, we start to notice it sooner and sooner, just like we do in the abuse cycle. Just like we notice things days after Oh, that's what was happening. Oh, that was gaslighting. He was minimizing my emotions and saying that it didn't matter and it didn't count. Oh, that's what was happening. We bring awareness to it and we start to catch it sooner and sooner and sooner. But we can't go from noticing it like a week or 2 weeks after to noticing it right in the moment of when it's happening overnight. That takes probably several weeks, maybe several months to get to that point where you went from noticing it after the fact, days after, maybe even weeks after, to now noticing it, oh, like in the moment or right after. Like we get to that where we're working it backwards and now we start to notice it even before we get into it. Oh, okay, I know what the triggers are. Like for my ex, I know when he's feeling stressed, when he feels disrespected, those are two big indicators of like something's going to come out at me. And it's not me, it's him. And I don't have to take that on. I don't have to own it. And I learn how to regulate my nervous system so that when it gets jacked up, because inevitably it will, that I can calm it down without the food and without the alcohol. That is where our growth is. And this is what I help people do. So if you want to learn more about this in more depth around codependency, emotional eating, and emotional abuse, I've got a free 3-day workshop. You can go to www.bodyyoucrave.com/HFL. It stands for Hungry for Love. So bodyyoucrave.com/HFL. And I'll make sure that there's a link in with the video as well, so that it's easy to click on. You might need that www part beforehand. But this is what I break down, or I really go into more depth to understand how this works. This is what I do with clients. So if you want to learn more about this, you can listen to the Body You Crave podcast. I have a journal on Amazon, also called Body You Crave. So if this is something that you want, and also feel free to reach out to me in the forum. Feel free to send me a direct message. Feel free to find me on Instagram or Facebook, or I am here. I am a real person. I am walking the walk and doing things and learning right alongside every one of you. And I'm making this connection between the realm that I know really well, which is emotional eating, and seeing how it's so connected with emotional abuse so that I can help other people just like you. This is where we can find our power and we can take it back and we can find the success and we can truly create the life and the body we crave. All right, I think I'm over on time here, but I hope you'll have a fabulous, fabulous day. Again, reach out with any questions or comments. I would love to chat more. And I want to see everyone be successful and thriving and to feel better about themselves. So one of the final things I want to leave you with is that a smaller body doesn't fix a broken self-concept. Just trying to lose weight and feel better about yourself from a body perspective, from a weight perspective, doesn't change that self-concept about how you view yourself as a whole. We have to change our self-concept now and trust that that is what's going to give us the confidence and the ability to be able to break these cycles, break these habits, break these patterns when it comes to our relationship with food, when it comes to our relationship with alcohol, and when it comes to our relationship with others, especially the dysfunctional and toxic people in our lives. All right, here's to flying free.